Hello guys, how are we doing and welcome back to the channel. Today I have another Spawn Guide video and for this time it is on Rewind Hardpoint. I've already completed Vault, I've already completed Skyline, so if you're after the Hardpoint Spawn Guide, for those two you can check them out either in my recent video history or in the playlist down below. There's a couple of things I want to mention before we get fully in-depth into this Spawn Guide. First things first, I wanted to shout out to the recurring channel members we've got to this channel. There's a few of you guys, so shout out to all 10 of you, I believe there is, just showing you continued support and being around for a few months, even when MW3 was pretty much dead. So shout out for you guys for that. And secondly, this video can be complex. It can be hard to follow because spawns aren't an easy thing to understand. They're barely logical. And in order to make this easier, I've made a guide. Some of you may already be aware of it. But the guide is something you can have up on your second monitor or on your tablet or your phone, or you can use it as reading material while you're going for a number 2 or you're going to bed. But generally speaking, it's the same link. It's down in the description. You can find it on my Discord as well. You can save it as a bookmark if you want. And it looks like this. Every time I do a new guide on YouTube, I'll update it on here. So you can see you've got all the callouts for the competitive maps so far, followed by the Hardpoint Spawn Guide for Skyline and the Hardpoint Spawn Guide for Vault. When I do this video, by the time you see this video, hopefully there's a new one for Rewind, so you can go on here and sort of read through it with me. So you can either jump straight to the page you want, or you can just scroll down all the way through. It's completely up to you. But it's got, for the Spawn Guides, it's got the map of that hill, a breakdown of what it means. You've got general info, how to block, a strategy for that hill. And that's sort of what we're going to be covering in today's video, but with a bit more meat attached to it. So that's the intro done. Let's get into the guide. So for those of you who's somehow this is your first ever Spawn Guide you've seen of my channel, first of all, welcome. And second of all, I'm going to go through what this map means and what the icons and different colors all mean on this map. So first things first, we have the spawns. Okay, they're fairly simple. They're identifiable by rings. So this is a spawn, this is a spawn, this is a spawn, and this is a spawn location. So often I'll refer to that as the pink spawn or the blue spawn or the teal spawn or the yellow spawn. I've also put the communication in there that you're probably going to use in game. So if you're communicating to your team because you've already learned the spawns, you can say, oh, they're spawning SWAT or they're spawning front radio, for example. And that's the spawn points. Next, we have these shaded areas, suggested ways in which you could block a certain spawn. So in order to block this pink spawn, for example, you can be in the shaded area out, and that will most of the time block this pink spawn. Finally, we have 2 hill locations, one being a really vibrant, bright green, and that's the current hill. So obviously we're on P1. This is the start of the video. So P1 is nice and vibrant. And we also have P2, which will be the next hill, which is a little bit dim, just because I think that's important for reference and part of the decision as to, like, part of the strategy when we get into it later on. I do want to say one thing. I'm going to be talking about general info on the spawns. I'm going to be talking about blocking. I'm talking about a strategy. You can block any spawn by being in sight of it. So that doesn't just mean looking at it. That means your play model can literally, all it needs to do is rotate and pivot to look at that spawn point, that will block that spawn as well. So there's going to be a bunch of different ways you can do so. But enough of the rambling. There's already been 3 minutes. Let's get into P1. So on P1, the main spawns are blue and pink, and typically at the beginning of the game and potentially when P1 originally pops, this will be the 2 main spawns you see used most. On this hill, in particular, and on a lot of hills on this map, the game will try to spawn you at the furthest possible spawn away from the enemies. So whether that means it flips you or not, it will spawn you at the furthest possible spawn away from the enemies. So that means if the enemies are pushed up all the way around P1 and you're first to die, sometimes the game spawns you the other side of the map, as I say, and it flips you. So as a result, what typically happens, and we'll give you the info most of the time, is if you're spawning pink or radio, they're likely to be spawning teal or P4 alley. And if you're spawning yellow, for example, chances are, or P2, chances are they're spawning blue and SWAT. So it's either these 2 spawns being used most of the time or these 2 spawns being used most of the time, okay? Now, obviously, this is a massive generalization, as it's far more technical than that. But if there's one thing you want to take, and there's one thing you try and remember from this hill first time round, if I'm spawning there, chances are they're spawning there. If I'm spawning here, chances are they're spawning there, and vice versa. Now, we're going to move on to blocking. So in order to block a certain spawn pot, you simply have to be closer to that spawn than one other spawn point. Okay, so for example, if I wanted to block this pink spawn, which I would advise doing for this hill, you would want to make sure you've got someone closer to this one on your team than one other. So block this one and be nowhere near this one means that the enemy will spawn this one. It's that simple. To guarantee the enemy spawn either SWAT or P4 rally or blue and teal, which is what you want considering P2 is this side of the map, you simply have to have someone staying as far back enough to block P1 to both of these two spawn points. So, you know what, they're probably around this general region where my cursor is currently. That could mean in laundry, as I say, it could mean in elephant or in just that general region. You can be in burger to block pink, but that leaves yellow slightly open if your teammates decide to get aggressive. So be careful that if you're spawning here, if you're here to try and block this spawn, it might leave this spawn open if you get a little bit too aggressive towards these two spawn points, sorry. Now, if you do want a player to push up and be a little bit more aggro, you literally need somebody all the way back between these two spawns, or as I said, in elephant or laundry, to be able to not flip that spawn. Now let's take some scenarios. Let's imagine ourselves in that situation itself. Let's imagine you spawn in, and wherever you spawn, just remember you've most likely spawned there because the enemy are closer to the other three spawn locations. That's the general logic, okay? And as I say, if there's one thing you want to try and remember, that's what it is. Now, if you spawn radio or SWAT, so one of these two spawns, and you're with your team and it's the beginning of the round, it typically means that you've just have the default spawn and there's nothing too much to read into it. Now, if you spawn P2 in yellow, it typically means the enemy have control of most of the right-hand side of the map, so over here, but they're slightly pushed up towards this upper side here, so there might be in burger blocking yellow, and they're over here, which means you've spawned here. Now, if you spawn front radio or pink, it means the enemies have most of the control of the right-hand side of the map again, but they're more pushed around this bottom side of the map where my cursor is, and therefore blocking this spawn and these spawns, meaning you spawn there. So I hope you can sort of understand the logic here. And then if you spawn P for rally, it means the enemies have the most control of this left-hand side of the map, and they're slightly pushed up towards burger, and therefore blocking these three spawns. And similarly, if you spawn SWAT, it typically means the enemy has most of control over these two, and they're pushed up a little bit side to the right-hand side. But yeah, that's pretty much as it is. So strategy-wise, if you see me looking down, by the way, I've got a couple of notes that I'm reading, so I'm not being antisocial by not looking directly at you. It's because I've got notes that I'm trying to refer to as I go along, and these are the same notes that are going to be in that ranked play guide. So it goes without saying that you need to try and keep this hill as scrappy as possible because it's a super mixy hill, and it's really hard to have like a proper solid hold on it. The only way to control the enemy spawn is to have someone fairly out of the play, blocking the spawns you want to keep, which means where the other three are getting aggressed by the other team, they're outnumbered and often you lose the hill. So that's why it tends to be quite scrappy and can be flipped. And yeah, it means breaking a hill is quite easy if someone's sat back and in their spawn literally trying to block. Fighting for the left-hand side spawns is ideal throughout the whole of the hill due to P2 being decently easy hill to hold. So having these spawns when P2 pops is essential. But it's even more vital, obviously, towards the end of P1 as you really need these spawns for P2, as I say. Now, the best way to take these spawns, if you don't already have them, is to flank around towards front radio or around P2 and ensure you keep going around the spawn. So don't just stop there. If you manage to get around to P2, don't just stop there because the enemies might be spawning here. You want to make sure you go all the way around and block, make sure they're not spawned here either. So you've got this whole backside controlled. Similarly, if you want to get these back spawns by going right, don't just stop here, go all the way around and make sure they haven't spawned at both of these. Again, when you rotate to the new hill, you're rotating for the spawn, not the hill. The hill is a secondary thing. The spawn makes it easier to get the hill. And that's P1. As I say, if there's any questions throughout any of this that you're not quite sure on, if I've whizzed over something too quickly or if something's not quite as clear as it should be, feel free to leave a comment down below, or you can DM me on Discord or Twitter. Again, all the links down in the description. So moving on to P2 here, the main spawns are typically pink or barber, we're going to call it. It's not quite barber, but it's close enough. And blue, which is in the court. Teal, which is the orange truck here, and yellow, which is in this graffiti bit here where all the like the dustbins are used when the other two can't be used because they're blocked. Okay, so the main spawns are these two the alternative spawns. Now, whatever team has general control of radio, which is here, and the very left-hand side of the map will keep spawning pink unless someone from the enemy team gets pushed up enough into barber and radio that they are able to block pink and yellow spawns. Okay, so whoever has control of this general area is likely to spawn here unless someone from this side of the map pushes all the way around and manages to get further enough into these spawns to block both of these areas. Okay. The game will then look to spawn them out at blue. So let's say you're being blocked and you can't spawn at either of these two. The game will then look to go, okay, the next available spawn must be blue. Let's see if they can spawn you blue. Or teal, I guess. It could be blue or teal. Now, out of these two, the game will decide to spawn you at the one furthest away from your enemy. So, which, if you were spawning pink, is likely to be teal, because chances are, in order to block pink, they've gone around this way, which means they're closer to here than they are here. So chances are you will likely, when you flip, you'll spawn here. But it doesn't, it depends. But yeah, it's fairly simple. In order to spawn out from pink, it means someone's got all the way into your depths. And if you spawn here, it means they're over here. If you spawn here, it means they're over here. Okay? Now, when we're going to go a little bit into blocking here, and you can block barber spawn, which is here, by being pushed up street towards the front of radio, which is this little pink zone here, or by being pushed towards the backside of P2, which is where this little pink zone is as well. Now, if you would also like to block yellow, which is the ideal situation, you want to block both if you want the enemy to flip, make sure you're pushed into the back of radio, which is right here, or near the cop car, which is this little rectangle here, in order to block both. Now, being pushed up towards the front of P1, i.e. where this zone is, will block the court spawns and will instead spawn your enemies orange, and also pushing up RV, or where this general teal shaded, this light blue shaded zone is, that'll block teal, and the game will then look for an alternative spawn from teal for whoever to spawn in, whoever's blocking. Okay, so let's try and simplify this. Let's put ourselves into the map. Let's take some scenarios next. So if you spawn barber and your team have control of that area, that's just your default spawn because your team has hill control, or that general area of the control map controlled. Okay. Now, if you spawn court and the enemy team are on the hill, you've purely spawned court because the enemy have got control of that hill area. All right, it's fairly straightforward. So pink and blue, fairly easy to understand. Now, if you go from spawning barber to spawning graffiti, some of you are probably going to already know what I'm going to say here. It means the enemy is pushed up Main Street towards the front of radio. Okay, so they've got this control of this map over here. Now, if you go from spawning barber to court, interesting one, it means all the enemies have pushed through P2 and are blocking both graffiti and barber. Now, if you end up spawning orange truck, or in this teal zone, it tends to mean the enemy has P2 control, otherwise you'd spawn back here, but someone is also blocking court. So it means they're either just coming off the court spawn themselves, or they're set up somewhere near burger, blocking the spawn purposefully, okay? And they're looking to control that area of the map, because that's where P3 is. So strategy-wise, you need to try and get barber spawns as early as possible, and it takes no brainiac to understand that this is much of a better spawn than either of these two, okay, because of how close it is to the current objective. Now, if you spawn here, you need to do everything to keep these spawns, and if you don't, you need to do everything to get these spawns. Don't forget to ease off towards the end of P2, obviously. You don't want to be trying to get that back spawn with 10 seconds left, because realistically, you want this right-hand side of the map for P3 and P4. So just ease off when you get to the end of the hill. You don't want to flip at the last point, because you're in the mud then for the next two hills. Chances are you're probably going to lose. Now, in order to hold pink spawns, you need to have somebody to stay alive as much as possible to block these both, the yellow and the pink spawn, or barber and graffiti, whatever you want to call them. And blocking these, no matter what happens, will make sure the enemy spawns are one of these two spawns, okay? Now, holding all 3 lanes is very important. And when I say 3 lanes, you're probably like, this isn't a 3-lane map, Harry. What are you on about? I mean, this lane, the buildings, and the right lane. So you've got Main Street, the buildings, and back street. You want to make sure you've got someone on hill, and you've got someone watching every one of those. So you could have someone situated on hill, you could have someone graffiti watching the right lane, you could have someone front radio watching the left, and you've got someone with a sub, preferably inside here somewhere, just being a bit difficult and a bit hard to kill. And then when you get to the end of P2, you want to start to push out of P2 and rotate to P3. And then hopefully, when there's maybe 5-10 seconds left, you flip the spawns and you make sure the enemy spawns here by pushing all the way out towards this side of the map as a team. Don't forget, if there's a single player left back here, it will block the spawn, okay? So you want to make sure every one of your teammates are moving forward and pushing towards this side of the map to make sure you flip for the new hill. So just like any other mid-map hardpoint position on this game, so similar to P1 and this, similar to a couple of hills on the other maps we've covered, whoever is next to spawn in will spawn in at the furthest point away from an enemy player. Okay, so the game will look to spawn you which one of these 4 is furthest from their enemy, okay, that one, let's plonk them in there when they spawn in. That's pretty much what the game does, just very quickly. The main spawns are pink, which is SWAT, and blue, which is radio, and both teams will continue to spawn here if both teams remain relatively passive, okay? So if both teams don't move from their hills much, from their spawns much, sorry, that's the main two spawns. But realistically, you're playing ranked, you're playing comp, people are going to be getting aggressive, so that, you know, these two don't remain the default spawns for long. Now, teal, which is Barber, well, I'm going to call Barber, and yellow, which is this back lorry here, will open up as alternative spawns if they happen to be on the other team. If someone on the other team happens to be a little bit more aggressive and approaches closer to your primary two spawns. Okay, so and that will just be like, okay, the game will go, shit, they're close to this one, let's spawn them a little bit further back to keep them safe when they spawn in straight away. Now, in order to flip spawns here, now imagining we're spawning blue side and we want P4 spawns, you need one person closer to the yellow spawn or lorry spawn than the teammate closest to teal, if that makes any sense whatsoever. Because essentially, if you have a teammate who's closer to this spawn than this one, the enemy, when they spawn in, will be like, okay, let's spawn them here because they're too close to here, and this is the furthest spawn point away from any particular player on the enemy team. Okay, I'm trying to make it logical, I'm trying to make it simple. Forgive me if it's not, but again, just ask if it's not clear. An easy way to stop a flip from occurring, if you want to keep the spawn you have, is to dedicate someone to stay in closer to your own two spawns than the player furthest pushed up is close to their furthest spawn. So let's say you've got this spawn control. You need to make sure you've got a player dedicated to staying closer to these two spawns than you have someone pushed up towards this spawn. Okay. As soon as a player pushes up further and closer to this spawn, then we have someone to this, they'll flip. Okay. So you need to make sure you're actively blocking in order to stop that flip from happening. Now, blocking is pretty easy to block both radio and SWAT spawns. To spawn the enemy, whichever side they are, further away from P4, all you need to do is have a teammate push somewhat into the mid-map, whilst having someone else on the team block the current spawns you have. And that'll basically spawn the enemy a little bit further away. Having someone sat back and blocking the home spawns, we can call them, is vital in keeping the spawns you currently have. Otherwise, pushing up will literally result in the enemy spawning behind you. Okay, so you can have someone pushed up, great, but you need someone blocking these two spawns. Otherwise, they'll flip, and you're in for a sticky ride. Okay. Now let's put ourselves in the shoes of an actual player in the game. Let's go through a couple of scenarios here and what each scenario means. So if you spawn either radio or SWAT and you spawn with your team, there's nothing to note. That's just your default spawn because your team are there and the enemy team at the other side of the map. Okay, that's pretty much all that means. Now, if you end up spawning on the same side but further back, so let's say you go from pink to yellow, it will mean an enemy has pushed past the midway line and that they still have control of the other side of the map. Okay, so they've got control of these two, but they've pushed a little bit further up, so that means you can't spawn here, you've had to spawn there. Now, if you end up flipping, all it means is that the enemies have moved closer to both of your home spawns than they are from their own home spawns, okay? So they've moved way out of their spawn, and they're more encroached into your spawn than they were their own, and as a result, the game's been like, okay, this is now the safest spawn for you, I'll flip you. Now, strategically, I personally think that radio spawns are a little better than SWAT spawns for P3 itself, marginally. I know it is marginal because realistically, if the enemy team are spawning lorry, they've got to run down this real open route to get to the hill, whereas you've got a little bit of cover. That's the only reason I'd say that. But I still think the fact that the SWAT spawn is literally next to P4 keeps it as the strongest hill, and that's why it's my preferred hill for throughout P3. Now, if you manage to obtain these SWAT spawns from the start, you need at least one person to stay close to these spawns. They could be like SWAT van or just in this general area. This will stop the enemy from flipping no matter how much your team pushes up. Okay, so having someone dedicated to blocking these two spawns means your teammates can just go rogue mid map and be really difficult to kill. Now, if you are unfortunate enough to have radio spawns at the beginning of this hill, which is obviously what I'm deeming as the least preferred spawns for this hill, all you need to do is dedicate a member of the team to try and flip the spawns. This may mean taking a longer route around this right-hand side street here, to past Orange Truck, all the way into the depths. And all they need to do is play their life as when they're around both of these maps, both these spawns. And as soon as they're staying alive and your team are getting kills, the game will go, okay, where can I spawn that player? That enemy player, where can I spawn that enemy player? It won't spawn them here because you've got a player playing their life here, and instead it will spawn them either one of these two. Chances are it'll be this one because it's further away from the action. And that's the start of the flip. That's how it starts, okay? But it's essential that you're getting the first kill when this player is back here blocking both of these spawns. Otherwise, it'll end up in a real shit show and people will spawn everywhere, okay? And that's P3. 2 more to go, guys. Don't worry. Hang in there. Now, I'm going to try and be a little bit more experimental here because I know it's quite hard to understand. I think it's logical in my head, but I know it might not be for others. So I'm going to try a couple of different ways to make this visual for you, okay? So the main spawns here are going to be pink, which is lorry, and blue, which we're going to call laundry. And you'll see most spawns occur in one of these two, okay? What we often see happen is whoever has pink or lorry spawns at the start, keep them so long as it's not completely a mismatched team, okay? So they'll keep these here most of the time, as long as it's not, as I say, a completely unbalanced team where this blue team somehow has got pros and these guys have got players who've never played comp before. They'll simply get these spawns relatively easy. But considering it's a fairly matched and even team, which we're likely to see on 8s or ranked play, whoever spawns here first is likely to keep it because it's so easy to keep. When a player respawns, they respawn at either one of these two, depending on which one is furthest away from an enemy player. Similar logic to what we've seen before. Now, if someone on your team respawns as an enemy player is really close to pink and blue, then it actually utilizes the backup spawn, which is in radio or teal, as we're going to call it, and that's almost the backup when these two are too close to someone on the enemy team. Now, let's try. This is the first time you've seen these big yellow rings, okay? So let's try and visualize this concept a bit better to help you guys out. And I'm hoping this helps. Maybe it doesn't, maybe it does, we'll see. The yellow rings around both of the spawns are the same size and therefore represent the same distance from that spawn point. So in order to block this pink spawn, you would need someone in this yellow zone and make sure no one on your team is in this blue zone. That'll mean that you've got someone closer to pink than you do closer to blue, okay? That's the logic. Let's take this a step further and push the rings out a little bit more. So you, again, both are the same size and represent the same distance away from that spawn point. Now you can say, okay, in order to block pink from even further away, it's doable. But I need to make sure none of my team are in this zone to block. Okay, so if we go back a step, this looks a bit tricky. It almost looks like you've got to pretty much be on the pink to block it, but you know it's fairly okay. In order for that to be happening, in order to be able to block pink spawn by being in this yellow zone, you just need to make sure no one's here. So it's quite easy, but again, you have to get really close to the hill, to the spawn point itself. On this, enables you, obviously this orange ring is a little bit further out from the actual spawn, and the only way you'll be able to flip spawns and get these spawns and block these spawns is to make sure no one's in this. So again, it's easier to make sure people can be in here because this zone's bigger, but it's more difficult because this zone's also bigger and means that you need to make sure all your team are out of this area of the map and more further up this side of the map than they are this side in order to actually be able to block it from here. I hope that sort of helps. First time doing it, let me know your thoughts. It's a bit tricky to explain. So another thing, sorry, it's super blurry. I've had to take a snapshot of an actual in-live game to help demonstrate this. I did want to try and get footage, but I don't want to get copyright striked. I don't simply want to clip something from a stream. And the only way I could do it, I guess, is if I set up an 8's lobby myself and did it. But this should suffice for now. So this is a real-life example. In this example, number 2 has just spawned in because player number 8 is closer to radio spawn, which is about here, than they are to the lorry spawn at the back. So because this player's closer to here than they are there, player 2 has spawned safely where they belong over here. Now, because this player number 8 has decided to push up a little, they now reside closer to the back lorry spawn than they do the laundry spawn, or the radio spawn, sorry. So player number 2 has therefore spawned out, simply because this player 8 has moved from here to here. They're now closer to this spawn than they are this spawn. So player 2 has gone, okay, I've died. That's where I'm going to spawn you because that's the safest spawn from the enemy team, okay? Now, moments later than this screenshot, a player on the red team dies and unfortunately loses a gunfight. Now, you're probably wondering where they're going to spawn because, you know, the blue team have got players here and here. And that's where we see the utilization of this teal spawn, this back radio spawn happen. Because how close player number 4 is to lorry, and how close number 2 is to the laundry spawn, player 8 has no choice but to spawn even all the way out towards radio, and that's where they end up spawning him. So I hope that's helped. I hope if you want something like that in the future for all player hills, I can do that if I can. So yeah. Strategy-wise then, it obviously goes without saying that the basic scenario here is to have lorry spawns with your enemy team spawning all the way in radio because of how far it is from the current objective. Now, in order to get that set up, you'll need to ensure you have players blocking lorry spawn, playing relatively deep, and someone also pushed up perhaps around sort of P3 area around here, or burger area, blocking that laundry spawn. Now, obviously, that's an ideal situation, and it's probably an unlikely scenario considering how competitive this can be. The main thing is to have lorry spawns, and in order for that to happen is to make sure enemies do not occupy the backside area of P4 and are spawning in laundry at least. Now, this means someone has to be playing their life, being a difficult kill towards this backside of the spawn. But if you happen to be on the other side, let's say you have to break a setup, which, you know, from the least fortunate spawn, you need to try and send a full team in one direction, get the first kill, and getting the first kill when all your team are pushed up will ensure that that person who you've just killed will spawn out. Getting the first kill is vital, otherwise you're unlikely to flip. Okay. And that's pretty much that. Now, what I would say is don't stress too much about having lorry spawns towards the end of P4, because laundry spawns actually makes it easier to set up for P5. You can see how close this spawn is to the new objective and how far away that is. So don't fight for lorry spawns when it's too late. Okay, be a little bit sensible. If there's 15, 20 seconds left, maybe go, okay, we give it up. Let's set up for P5. Talking of which, P5 locates itself in the little generator room. And the main spawns here are pink, which is on this little cop car or graffiti area, and then blue, which is again on the SWAT van. The team spawning on the right-hand side of the map. There's also another primary spawn, which sort of we'll get into in a second, but that's this skip spawn here, which is teal. So main spawns, this one, and this one. Now, if the pink team, or the people spawning pink, are pushed up towards P1 area, the default spawn for this right-hand side of the map will be teal. And similarly, if this pink team is pushed up towards this RV, this right-hand side of the map area, the enemy team on this side of the map will spawn SWAT. So it will just, spawn them a little bit further away than where your team is pushed up towards. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Now, you're probably wondering what this little spawn's doing, and that's used if every single one of these other three spawns are blocked. The game will go, okay, that's not safe, that's not safe, that's not safe. Let's spawn them here. It's a little bit out of the way of the action. That means it's generally a safe spawn. Now, as already sort of mentioned, you can block cop car by being this side of P5 generally, and you can block blue spawn or SWAT van by being pushed up to the back left-hand corner of P1, at least closer to this than you are this. Okay, that's generally how you can block it. You can block teal or the skip as the skip spawn by being pushed up to this right-hand side of the street, slightly over P5, maybe past the RV, backside of P5. And that'll mean that the game will no longer let them spawn there. And if you push a little bit even further towards core, it won't let them spawn there either. And that's where this spawn opens up. If you're blocking this, and someone's getting really aggressive and they're sort of in core, the game will go, okay, you're really close to both of these spawns, I'm going to spawn them there. So it sort of punishes you for pushing a little bit too much there. Now, again, let's put ourselves in the player's position. Let's imagine we're playing the game and you spawn cop. And it simply means that the enemies aren't close enough to this area of the map to block it. And it probably means you've spawned on your team who have probably got this side of the map controlled. Now, if you spawn SWAT car, it means the enemy has the left and bottom side of P5 control. Okay, so you've got enemies here and here. Now, if you spawn skip, it means the enemy has left and top side of P5 control. So they're about here and here. Therefore blocking pink and blue spawns, which means you've spawned here a little bit further out. Now, if you ever find yourself spawning at this yellow spawn, it means the enemy has a lot of map control. Obviously, they have a lot of map control because they're blocking 3 bloody primary spawns. So if you spawn here, it means they're pretty much pushed anywhere. They're likely running wild, and they're close enough to the cop car, the skip, and the SWAT van to make sure that you've spawned here, okay? So just be careful coming out of spawn. You've probably got people running around with subs everywhere. And that's what you need to try and remember. Those scenarios that I go through on each are probably quite important. So, strategy-wise. Now, I prefer to have cop car spawns here because of a few reasons. Firstly, it's easy to see the side street. So if you spawn here, you can get on top graffiti. You can see the whole side street, which means your players on P5 can't get flanked through this side. Entrance to the middle building from this spawn point is just as easy as it is on the other side, which means that the enemy can't get flanked through the middle building. And it's also close. It's also this left-hand side of the map is the best to control P1 and P2 spawns as well. So it just saves you having to try and flip or rotate for the next couple of hills as well if you already have this left side of the map controlled. Now, I try and get these spawns as early on as possible, obviously, and that'll ensure your team has the best chance of getting the hill time on P5. You can get these spawns by flanking and sitting in graffiti or this general area. This will force the enemy to spawn elsewhere, and it's important that the rest of the team realize the desired or release the desired enemy spawn. So let's say, for example, you manage to get into cop car area here, you're in graffiti, you're blocking the spawn. What's important is that your team are nowhere near wherever you want them to spawn, so that that becomes the safest place to spawn. Now, personally, I like to have the enemy spawn in teal or skip because it means they've got a pretty linear route to the hill. They're either going to, run directly to P5 from the front, or they're going to go through glass into P1 zone, which means you can sort of know where they're coming from. So in order to have that, you need to make sure that you've not got a player push too close here, which means you want whoever's on this watching this right-hand lane needs to be sat quite far back watching it, okay? In order to stop them from spawning here, you then have to have people sort of in P1 area. They can also be playing cuts as well from anyone coming through the glass from this spawn. But that will essentially mean you've got players sort of in the zone I'm sort of highlighting here, okay? And anywhere sort of in this zone, we'll make sure that they spawn back here. But just be careful. As soon as they overstep that mark and they get a little bit close to that spawn, they'll spawn behind you. So just be very careful. And that's pretty much that. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you found it useful. As I say, any questions, leave them down below and I will hopefully answer them. But yeah, that'll do for me. I'll see you in the next one. Ciao for now.